Imagine this. You're standing in front of a mirror, not the one in your bathroom, but a different kind. This one doesn't reflect your skin or your clothes or even your face. It shows you what you are when no one is watching. It reflects the bitter thoughts you swallow, the fantasies you pretend you never had, the rage you dress up as politeness, and the pain you disguise as productivity. And for a moment, just a moment, you see yourself completely. Not the curated self, not the self that wins applause, but the one you hide even from your own awareness. And you flinch, because something ancient and unspeakable stares back. Not a demon, not a monster, not some foreign invader, but you, a part of you that has always been there, waiting, watching, rotting in silence. What would you do in that moment? Would you confront it? Would you admit its presence? Would you have the courage to ask why it's there? Or would you look away and pretend the mirror lied? Now imagine that this mirror doesn't exist in some sacred monastery or secret temple. It's in every conversation you avoid, every moment of jealousy you repress, every lie you tell to keep the peace.
It lives in the way your stomach tightens when you're not validated, the way you laugh too hard to mask your discomfort, the way you sabotage the good because a hidden part of you doesn't believe you deserve it. This is the shadow. But not the shadow you read about on Instagram posts, or hear mentioned in watered-down therapy speak.
This isn't about embracing your dark side as a trendy form of self-love. No. This is about the terrifying work of meeting the parts of yourself that you've exiled and not rescuing them. Not yet. Not until you understand why they were banished in the first place. Not until you see what they've become in the dark, alone. Because here's the paradox no one warns you about. The more you try to become a better person, the more violently your shadow grows. The more enlightened you appear, the more cunningly it adapts. It wears the robes of your ideals, speaks in the tone of your values, and it will outwit your conscience if you're not careful. Think about it. How much of your kindness is laced with superiority? How much of your discipline is driven by shame? How much of your success is a monument to your fear of being nothing? This is the shadow work no one talks about, the kind that doesn't end with a cathartic journal entry or a spiritual high. It's not glamorous, it doesn't trend, it hurts, because it asks you to peel back the layers of every virtue you claim, every belief you've adopted, and every identity you've built. It's the moment you realize your compassion might be a survival strategy, that your spirituality might be a refined mask for control, that your productivity might be a way to silence the voice that says, "You're not enough." What if healing isn't about becoming whole, but about learning to live with the parts that will never fully heal? What if growth isn't about improvement, but about honesty? And what if your worst moments, your failures, your betrayals, your self-destructive habits aren't mistakes, but messages? Symbols of something deeper trying to break through the performance of who you're supposed to be? You see, the real shadow work doesn't happen when you meditate. It happens when you're triggered. It happens when someone disrespects you and you fantasize about revenge, when someone gets what you wanted and you secretly hope they lose it. When you act like you've forgiven but still rehearse the argument in your head. When you wear the mask so long you forget where your skin ends and the disguise begins. And here's the haunting question no one wants to ask. What if the parts of you you're most ashamed of are the most honest things about you? Not beautiful, not enlightened, but true. And in that raw, uncomfortable truth, what if there was a kind of freedom you've never tasted? The kind that doesn't sell, the kind that doesn't flatter your ego, the kind that feels like dying before it feels like liberation. So, if all that is true, if your real shadow is the buried architect of your identity, not just a container of flaws, then what does that say about the life you've built? About the version of you you show the world? Are you the hero? Or just the mask the villain wears in daylight? Keep looking in that mirror. Don't blink. The next layer is waiting. And it's not what you think. The shadow isn't a mistake of the psyche, it's its foundation. To understand this, you must go far beyond surface-level psychology. beyond pop trauma jargon and commodified healing. You have to trace it back to the very origins of selfhood. Because the truth is, you were born into a world that required your fragmentation, not suggested it, demanded it. From the first moment you reached for something your caregivers didn't approve of, your psyche began to divide. Not because it was broken, but because it was intelligent. You adapted, you survived, but you paid for it with your wholeness. Carl Jung, the father of shadow psychology, knew this well. He called the shadow the thing a person has no wish to be. But he also warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Let that settle. You are not being ruled by what you know about yourself. You are being ruled by what you refuse to know. And society, this manic, image-obsessed, virtue-posing society, rewards you for refusing. Think of it. The more polished your persona, the more invisible your shadow becomes. But invisibility is not the same as non-existence. The shadow doesn't die in repression. It metastasizes. It becomes neurosis, projection, addiction, passive aggression, martyrdom, chronic guilt, silent resentment, the polite violence of a smile that hides contempt. Gabor Maté once wrote, "The attempt to escape pain is what creates pain." And nowhere is this truer than in the human relationship with shame. Shame is not a glitch in our wiring. It is the thread that binds the mask to the face. It teaches you which parts of yourself must be buried for the tribe to accept you. And it works. Too well. What do you call a child who cries too much? Weak. A teenager who questions too loudly? Rebellious. An adult who feels too deeply? Dramatic. So you learn to split, to compartmentalize, to bury. And the ego, your surface self, builds a narrative to survive that fracture. It tells you who you are, but more importantly, it tells you who you must never become again. Now enter Nietzsche, who tore the veil off this entire charade. Every profound spirit needs a mask, he said. And he was right. Not because people are dishonest, but because existence is unbearable without illusion. Identity is an armor forged in contradiction. You crave authenticity, but you fear rejection. You want to be seen, but only in the ways you've pre-approved. You say you want truth, but not if it comes dressed in ugliness. Here lies the philosophical root of the hidden problem. The more virtuous the ideal, the more vicious its shadow. Aldous Huxley saw this in spiritual circles. The more someone claimed enlightenment, the more they were often possessed by ego in disguise. Schopenhauer saw it in the will, the blind, irrational drive beneath all human behavior that cares nothing for morality, only for power. Kierkegaard called it despair, the sickness unto death that arises not from suffering but from not being willing to be oneself. And yet we go on performing. We build identities out of avoidance. We call trauma personality. We call repression maturity. We call fear morals. But none of these labels touch the real phenomenon. Because beneath all of this, beneath the curated emotions, the learned behaviors, the scripted selves, there is a trembling, neglected truth. You are still trying to earn the right to exist. Not consciously, existentially, psychologically, philosophically. And that unspoken desperation, that hunger to be enough, is what keeps the shadow alive, not as an enemy, but as a distorted twin. The parts of you that got locked in the basement are still banging on the walls, begging to be acknowledged. But here's the cruel trick. The longer they go unheard, the more they rot. And when they do emerge, they don't come out as vulnerability. They come out as rage, as envy, as addiction, as cruelty disguised as righteousness. Jean-Paul Sartre once said, "Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself." But he also warned that we are condemned to be free, to carry the weight of that making without excuses. You cannot blame your family forever. You cannot blame culture, religion, or circumstance indefinitely. At some point, the lie becomes your own. And here's the tragedy. Most people will die never having met their real self. Not because it was too far away, but because it was too close, too raw, too honest. Because to meet your shadow fully is to lose the comfort of the story you've told yourself. And for many, that story is the only thing standing between them and existential collapse. So we choose amnesia. We chase goals to distract from our grief. We moralize to avoid our monstrosity. We numb our shame with status and spirituality. And we pretend we're whole while quietly disintegrating inside. But there's a deeper cost. Every part of you that goes unloved becomes a ghost. And ghosts don't disappear. They haunt, not your house, but your mind, your relationships, your dreams, your moods. You wonder why you're anxious, but it's not anxiety. It's unlived truth screaming for air. You wonder why you're depressed, but it's not depression. It's your real voice, buried beneath decades of performance. Zygmunt Bauman, the philosopher of liquid modernity, described how in today's world everything is changeable, disposable, customizable, even the self, especially the self. And yet, in this endless fluidity, we are more anxious than ever. Because when nothing is solid, nothing can be held, not love, not identity, not even grief. And that's the core of the shadow's grip. It's not just personal, it's cultural, it's philosophical, it's existential. The hidden problem isn't that you have a shadow, it's that you live in a world built to deny it. And that denial becomes your prison. But here's the whisper beneath the rubble. What if the only way out is through the door you've been most afraid to open? And what if, on the other side of that door, your shadow isn't the monster after all, but the part of you that remembers who you really are? The danger of the shadow isn't its existence, it's its invisibility. Because what you don't see, you can't question. What you don't question, you serve. And what you serve blindly becomes your master. You wake up each morning believing you're in control, choosing your words, managing your image, planning your life. But underneath, like an old operating system you forgot you installed, something else is running. A buried algorithm built not on freedom, but on avoidance. A reflexive urge to protect the fragile fiction of who you think you are. And that fiction bleeds into everything. You think you're choosing your partner, your career, your friends. But what if your choices aren't coming from your desires, but from your wounds? What if your ambition is really a compensation for shame? What if your nice personality is a strategy to keep people close while never letting them see you? What if every major decision you've made was a collaboration between your ego and your fear? This is not theoretical. It plays out every day in silent ways. You date people who reflect your unhealed patterns. You work jobs that confirm your core belief, I must earn my worth. You stay in relationships long after they've withered because abandonment would validate your deepest dread, that you are ultimately unlovable. You chase experiences not to feel alive, but to escape the parts of you that feel dead inside. And all of it feels normal, because it is normal, by cultural standards. But normal is not the same as natural. A culture that punishes authenticity will normalize self-betrayal. Here's how the shadow hides. When someone rejects you, and you suddenly spiral into self-hatred, that's not just hurt. That's every childhood wound echoing through the present. When you feel irrational envy toward a friend's success, and you judge them for being fake or privileged, that's not discernment. That's disowned ambition clawing at the edges of your morality. When you lash out at someone you love, not because they did anything wrong, but because they triggered something you never gave yourself permission to feel, that's not a bad day. That's a ghost breaking through. These moments aren't breakdowns. They are revelations, flashlights flickering in the darkness. And if you don't recognize them for what they are, they harden into personality traits. You stop calling it shadow. You start calling it just how I am. The hidden becomes identity. Neurologically, this process is brutally efficient. The human brain is wired for survival, not truth. It automates anything that feels familiar, even if that familiarity is toxic. It rewards repetition. It confuses comfort with safety. It does not care whether your beliefs are self-defeating. It only cares that they're predictable. Because predictability feels like control, and control feels like survival. The shadow exploits this. It embeds itself in neural loops. It becomes your tone of voice, the tension in your shoulders, the way you avoid eye contact during conflict, the silence after someone asks how you really are. It doesn't scream. It doesn't need to. It whispers in impulses. It disguises itself as intuition. And worst of all, it wears the mask of logic. You start to rationalize your avoidance. You intellectualize your anger. You spiritualize your detachment. You call your defenses boundaries. You call your numbness peace. And society cheers you on. Because a well-adjusted shadow servant is profitable. You buy products to feel better. You post to be seen. You chase relevance, validation, attention, all the while mistaking visibility for connection. But deep down, you feel it. That quiet ache, that unnameable fatigue, that sense that no matter what you do, it's never enough. This is the silent scream of the shadow, begging to be integrated. Not just understood, but held, felt, humanized. Because without that, you start leaking. You project what you won't face. You become emotionally contagious. You gaslight yourself into thinking you're the problem when really, the problem is you've never met yourself beneath the performance. This isn't just personal, it's collective. You can see it in politics, ideologies clashing not over policy, but over identity wounds masquerading as morality. You see it in religion, faith weaponized by people terrified of their own doubts. You see it in cancel culture, righteousness used as a shield to avoid confronting our own complicity. You see it in burnout culture, exhaustion romanticized as passion, while the shadow feasts on unacknowledged emptiness. It's everywhere. Because we live in a society that trains people to be fragments, to be productive before being conscious, to be good before being whole, to be admired no matter the cost. And so the cost is enormous. We lose intimacy, because how can you be close to someone when you've never been close to yourself? We lose truth, because how can you be honest when you don't know which voice in your head is real? We lose freedom, because you can't choose freely when the chooser is still a stranger. That's the terrifying irony. You think you're free, but you're not choosing. You're compensating. You're not living. You're reacting. You're not being. You're managing. Managing your image. Managing your shame. Managing the fallout of decades of unprocessed pain. And eventually, it catches up. In the quiet moments. In the failed relationships. In the career you secretly resent. In the friendships that feel more like performances. In the therapy sessions where you speak truth you don't yet believe. But here's the thing. These aren't signs that you're broken. They're signals that something deeper is trying to break through. Not to destroy you, but to reveal you. And maybe that's what the shadow really is. Not a flaw, but a flare. A burning call from the parts of you that refuse to die. The parts of you that have been watching, waiting. Not for rescue, for reckoning. And maybe, just maybe, if you turn toward it, fully, honestly, without flinching, you won't be consumed. You'll be reclaimed. You do not heal by becoming someone else. You heal by remembering who you were before you learned to hide. The rebellion begins not with an act, but with a refusal. A refusal to keep playing the role. A refusal to keep apologizing for your humanity. A refusal to keep betraying the parts of you that have never stopped whispering, "This isn't a T who you are." And when that whisper becomes unbearable, you have two choices: sedate it or face it. This is where the real shadow work begins. Not in journaling prompts, not in weekend retreats, not in spiritual bypassing disguised as letting go, but in the raw confrontation with your inner exile. The version of you locked in the basement because the world told you it was too much, too angry, too needy, too wild, too soft, too ugly, too strange, too real. That version of you isn't a threat, it's your compass, but you must be willing to sit with it, to listen without fixing, to feel without fleeing, to remember without rewriting. And that takes courage, because true integration is not an aesthetic, it's an undoing. It's a deconstruction of your entire psychological scaffolding. And the first thing it asks of you is the thing you've been most afraid to give. Your story. Not the one you tell others, the one you tell yourself, that you're the peacemaker, the achiever, the forgiver, the logical one, the enlightened one, the survivor. All of it is true, and none of it is the whole truth. Because beneath every identity is a strategy, and beneath every strategy is a wound, and beneath every wound is a need, still alive, still pulsing, still waiting to be met. To break free, you must stop negotiating with your shadow. You must stop asking it to speak in ways that make you comfortable. You must stop filtering your rage, your grief, your hunger through the lens of acceptability. You must give yourself permission to want what you want, to hate what you hate, to say no and not explain, to say yes and not apologize, to feel without justification, to exist without earning. This is not selfishness, it is reclamation, and it is the only way out of the cage you were born into. Look at the lives of those who truly broke free, not in theory but in being. Nietzsche walked the edges of madness to say what no one else dared say, that to become who you are, you must first destroy who you were taught to be. James Baldwin, in the face of racial, cultural, and sexual erasure, spoke truths so raw they cut through centuries of silence. To be a Negro in this country, he wrote, and to be relatively conscious, is to be in a rage almost all the time. But he did not numb the rage. He used it, transformed it, turned it into fire and poetry and confrontation. Kierkegaard abandoned society's expectations to plunge into existential despair, not to wallow, but to understand. The greatest hazard of all, he said, losing oneself, can occur very quietly in the world, as if it were nothing at all. And Viktor Frankl, imprisoned in a Nazi concentration camp, stripped of everything, discovered that meaning is not found in comfort. It is found in the decision to face suffering without becoming it. When we are no longer able to change a situation, he said, we are challenged to change ourselves. Do you see it? The rebellion isn't loud, it's internal, it's terrifying, it's holy. And it starts with radical responsibility. Not the kind that shames you, the kind that liberates you. Because once you stop waiting for someone else to give you permission to exist, you stop performing for survival. You stop outsourcing your self-worth. You stop chasing a version of healing that's really just assimilation. And you start doing something terrifying. You feel the grief of decades lost to pretending. You feel the rage of a self betrayed again and again. You feel the terror of stepping outside the lines, knowing some people will leave. You feel the tremor of freedom in your chest, and it scares the hell out of you. Good. Fear means you're touching truth. Fear means you're close to something sacred. Now pause. Think about the one thing you still refuse to say out loud, the one thought, the one memory, the one emotion that you keep locked in a vault. That's your key. Not your curse, your key. Because the part of you most ashamed of is often the part that carries your power. The power to say no more. The power to create without asking. The power to stop blaming your parents, your past, your partner, your pain. The power to live without apology. This is the paradox of shadow work. You do not find yourself by becoming something new. You find yourself by remembering what you dared not be. And when you do, everything changes. The mask cracks, the story unravels, the fog lifts, and you begin to see with terrifying clarity, not just the cost of your forgetting, but the possibility of your remembering. You were never broken. You were never too much. You were never too late. You were simply hidden, beneath roles, beneath fear, beneath systems that benefited from your amnesia. But now, something ancient is waking up inside you, not a brand new self. A true one, not perfect. Not polished, not approved, but free. You were never meant to win the game. You were meant to wake up in the middle of it, realize it was a game, and choose not to play. That's the final turn most people never take. They spend their lives trying to fix themselves, hoping that if they just get good enough at healing, at achieving, at forgiving, at controlling, at letting go, they'll finally feel whole. But wholeness doesn't come from improvement. It comes from inclusion. And here's the truth no one tells you. You can't become whole without embracing the parts of you you swore you'd bury. The liar, the coward, the addict, the manipulator, the narcissist, the monster, the child who begged and still wasn't chosen. Because these parts aren't barriers to your healing. They are your healing. They are your forgotten inheritance. They are the pieces of you that refused to die when the world told them they should. And so they went underground. They became shadows, not because they were evil, but because they were exiled. Pushed into darkness by shame, by culture, by trauma, by the unbearable weight of conditional love. But the soul does not forget what it is. It waits. It waits for you to become quiet enough, still enough, brave enough to remember what the noise was keeping out. Yourself. That's the final truth. You are not here to be good. You are here to be real. And realness will cost you. It will cost you the comfort of being liked, the ease of being understood, the certainty of being right, the safety of fitting in. But what you gain in return is something no false self can ever touch. Sovereignty, not dominance, not egoic control, but sovereignty, the lived experience of being fully at home within yourself, no longer waiting for permission to exist, no longer splitting yourself to meet expectations, no longer hiding the messier dimensions of your truth, just to earn a love that always felt borrowed. This is the sacred fire every mystic, every artist, every rebel has touched and been changed by. It is what Rumi called the wound that lets in the light. What Carl Jung meant when he said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Because the darkness isn't the enemy, the darkness is the birthplace of creativity, of authenticity, of divine madness, of radical empathy. You cannot love humanity in its fullness if you have not faced the murderer in your own psyche. You cannot forgive the world until you've forgiven the parts of yourself that became like the world to survive it. This is the uncomfortable grace of shadow work. It humbles you. It ruins your fantasies of purity. It forces you to hold contradictions you used to judge. And then, it frees you. Not because you become better, but because you stop pretending. You stop needing to be healed to be worthy. You stop needing to be certain to speak. You stop needing to be understood to be true. You become you, not as an idea, but as a presence so raw, so whole, so alive that it scares people, and maybe even you. But that fear is sacred. It means you're no longer rehearsing life. You're inhabiting it. You are no longer at war with yourself. You are listening, including, honoring. And in that space, the game collapses. There is nothing left to prove, nothing left to earn, nothing left to escape. You realize the shadow was never a flaw in your design. It was the design, a mechanism for awakening, a cosmic tension pulling you back into your center. And now, you are here. Not as a brand, not as a performance, not as a projection, but as a presence, unapologetic, unedited, unrepeatable. And that, perhaps, is the final paradox. What you were running from was never your shadow. It was your light, buried under decades of shame, silence, and survival. The shadow was just the guardian, the keeper of your flame. The part of you that said, "If you won't protect this, I will." So now the question is no longer, how do I fix myself? It is, am I willing to live as the version of me who no longer needs fixing? Because the moment you are, the war ends, the split heals, the mask drops, and what remains is not a perfect being, but a human one. Beautifully fractured, dangerously honest, deeply awake. You become the one who remembers, the one who carries light and darkness with equal reverence, the one who doesn't seek the middle ground, but contains both extremes, the one who walks through the world as a living permission slip for others to do the same. You don't need to be understood to be whole. You don't need to be seen to be real. You don't need to be saved to be free. You only need to return to what is wild, to what is wounded, to what is waiting. And when you do, you will feel it. Not as a concept, but as a homecoming. The world won't change for you, but you will no longer need it to, because you'll know who you are beneath the masks, beyond the noise, beneath the shadow. A sovereign soul, untamed, unbroken, unforgettable. You won't be for everyone. You were never meant to be. You're here for truth, and truth is rarely polite, but it's always freeing.